The steering wheel felt different under my hands that Friday evening. Not rough, German engineering doesn't do rough, but somehow heavier, like it was carrying more than just the weight of my weekend bag in the back seat. 2 hours and 14 minutes from Phoenix to Clearwater Lake. I'd made this drive so many times I could navigate it in my sleep, past the sprawling subdivisions that bled into scrubland, through the canyon where cell service died for exactly 17 minutes, up into the pines where the air turned thin and clean. But tonight, something felt wrong before I even reached the turnoff. Maybe it was the way the late September light hit the asphalt, casting shadows that seemed to reach too far. Maybe it was the empty coffee cup rolling around the passenger seat, Caroline's favorite mug, the one with the faded lighthouse on it that she'd bought from some tourist shop in Maine. I'd stopped using it after she passed, couldn't bear the sight of it sitting clean and purposeless in the cupboard. But today I'd pulled it down without thinking, filled it with black coffee, and brought it along like she was still riding shotgun. 3 years. 3 years since the cancer took her, and I still caught myself setting 2 plates at dinner, still woke up reaching for the warm space she used to occupy. The grief had settled into something manageable most days, not gone, never gone, but worn smooth like river stones. The lake house was the only place where I could still feel her presence without the ache threatening to split me open. Which is why what I found when I pulled into the gravel driveway hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. My son Trevor sat in my chair, the weathered Adirondack I'd built with my own hands the summer Caroline got sick, like he'd been holding court for hours. His wife Jenna perched on the porch railing, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a wine glass that caught the dying light. And beside them, arranged like they were posing for some twisted family portrait, sat Jenna's parents, Harold and Vivian Caldwell. Him with his silver hair combed into submission and his polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Her with that particular brand of smile that rich women perfect, warm enough to seem genuine, cold enough to cut glass when needed. They all looked so comfortable, so settled, like they'd been there for days instead of hours. Trevor didn't even have the decency to look surprised when I got out of the car. He just tilted his head back against the headrest of my chair and said, with the casual authority of a man who'd never built anything with his own hands, "You're not welcome here anymore, Dad. This is their place now." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire you didn't know was burning. For a moment I couldn't process them. They were too absurd, too brazen, like someone had taken the script of my life and handed it to actors who'd never read their parts. "Excuse me?" My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Inside, something was already shifting, reorganizing itself around this new reality. "You heard me." Trevor's tone had the practiced indifference of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "Harold and Vivian need a place. You're here, what, maybe 6 weekends a year? It's selfish to let it sit empty when family needs it." Family. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. I looked past him through the screen door into the living room where Caroline's reading chair sat angled toward the window, where her favorite throw blanket still draped over the arm of the couch, where the cedar coasters I'd made in my workshop were stacked on the coffee table, except one, which sat directly under Vivian's wine glass, protecting wood that had already survived 40 years of lake weather. "Since when," I said slowly, "does something I own become something you can give away?" Jenna spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying that particular blend of condescension and impatience that wives sometimes use when they think their husbands aren't moving fast enough. "Since we decided it makes more sense this way. Harold lost his consulting contract. Vivian's been having health issues. They need somewhere peaceful to land, and honestly, Richard, you rattling around here alone isn't healthy." Rattling around. Like I was some broken part in a machine that needed replacing. Harold cleared his throat, a sound like expensive bourbon being poured over ice. "We're grateful for your generosity, Richard. We'll take excellent care of the place." I didn't answer him. My eyes stayed locked on Trevor, searching for some trace of the boy who used to help me stack firewood, who'd sit on this same porch and ask endless questions about why the lake changed color with the weather, who'd cried when we had to put down his childhood dog and insisted we bury her under the big pine where she used to nap in the shade. That boy was gone. In his place sat a 34-year-old man who'd learned to mistake entitlement for authority. "I drove 2 hours to be here," I said, my voice still unnaturally calm. "I'd like to come inside." "Not tonight," Trevor replied without hesitation. "We've got dinner plans. You'd be in the way." In the way? In my own house? At the place where Caroline and I had celebrated our 20th anniversary, where we'd scattered her father's ashes from the dock, where she'd sat during her final summer watching the sunset, paint the water gold, and telling me how grateful she was for every moment we'd had. Vivian adjusted her shawl and crossed her legs like she was settling in for a show. Harold poured himself more wine from a bottle I recognized, the good Cabernet from my cellar, the one Caroline had been saving for a special occasion that never came. Jenna smirked at something on her phone, and Trevor just sat there, waiting for me to accept this new order of things. I could have argued, could have reminded him that my name was on the deed, that I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years to pay for every board and shingle. Could have pointed out that Caroline's jewelry box was still upstairs, her gardening gloves still hanging in the mudroom, her presence woven into every corner of this place like light through fabric. Instead, I nodded once and said, "All right. Enjoy your evening." I turned and walked back to my car, their voices following me across the gravel. Harold asking about the wine vintage, Vivian commenting on the sunset, Trevor's laugh cutting through the evening air like broken glass. None of them watched me go. They were already erasing me from the scene, already rewriting the story of this place to suit their needs. The engine started on the first turn, and I reversed slowly down the driveway, my headlights sweeping across the porch one last time. In the glow, they looked like strangers who'd stumbled onto a movie set and decided to stay. The road away from Clearwater Lake runs through a stretch of pine that always smells like rain, even on dry days. Caroline loved that smell. We used to drive this road with the windows down, her hair whipping across her face as she hummed along to whatever folk song was playing on the radio. She had a way of finding harmony in everything: music, conversation, the rhythm of our life together. I gripped the wheel tighter and tried to push down the rage that was building in my chest like pressure behind a dam. It wasn't just the audacity of what Trevor had done. It was the ease of it. No hesitation, no flicker of guilt, no acknowledgement that he was taking something that didn't belong to him. By the time I reached the highway, full darkness had settled over the desert. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat, but I ignored it. I needed silence. I needed to think. The house in Phoenix greeted me with the familiar hollow echo of a space too large for one person. I'd bought it with Caroline when Trevor was in high school, thinking we'd fill the extra bedrooms with grandchildren someday. Now it felt like a museum of a life I used to live. Her coffee mug still in the sink, her reading glasses on the nightstand, her voicemail greeting still playing when people called the landline. I made coffee I didn't want and sat in my study, staring at the framed photo of Caroline on the bookshelf. It was taken at the lake house on an evening much like this one, the sun backlighting her auburn hair until it looked like spun copper. She was laughing at something I'd said, her head tilted back, completely unguarded. If she'd been on that porch tonight, Trevor wouldn't have gotten halfway through his little speech. Caroline didn't raise her voice often, but when she did, the air itself seemed to pay attention. She would have stood up from that chair, my chair, and asked him very quietly if he'd lost his mind. And he would have backed down, because even at 34, Trevor still remembered what disappointed Mom looked like. But Caroline wasn't here. She'd been gone for 3 years, and in that time, I'd been the accommodating father, writing checks without question, saying yes to every request, showing up when asked and disappearing when not. I'd told myself it was for the sake of staying close to my only child, that maybe if I gave enough, we'd hold something together that resembled the family Caroline had cherished. The phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up. A text from Trevor. "Just so you know, the lake house will be theirs permanently. Don't come back. No explanation, no discussion, just a line drawn in the sand over something he didn't own. I set the phone face down and stared out the window at the pool Caroline had insisted we never used anymore, its surface reflecting the lights from the house like scattered stars. For 3 years, I'd been careful not to rock the boat, afraid that any show of strength would push Trevor further away. I'd mistaken accommodation for love, passivity for wisdom. But families don't steal from each other and call it generosity. Families don't tell their fathers they're not welcome in their own homes. And sons don't erase their mother's memory for the sake of their in-laws' convenience. I reached for a legal pad and wrote a single line across the top. They will never forget this day. It wasn't a vow made in anger. It was a blueprint. And in my world, blueprints always get built. The call came the next evening while I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing the single plate from the simple dinner I'd made for myself. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, a glass of water, the kind of meal that sustains without celebrating anything. Trevor's name lit up the caller ID. I dried my hands before answering, taking my time. Richard. His voice was clipped, businesslike. Not Dad, not even Pop, like he used to call me when he was small. Just my first name, as if we were colleagues settling a contract dispute. Trevor. I wanted to follow up on yesterday. Madison and I talked it over with Harold and Vivian, and we've decided the lake house arrangement will be permanent. I turned off the water. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the arterial road that ran behind our neighborhood. Permanent, I repeated. That's right. They'll be moving in over the next few weeks. It makes sense for everyone. I walked to the window that looked out on the backyard, where Caroline's rose garden was slowly losing its battle with the desert heat despite my efforts to maintain it. She'd planted those roses the year after we moved in, convinced she could create something beautiful in a landscape that didn't naturally support it. Turned out she was right, but it required constant attention, constant care. Everyone except me, I said. Dad. The word came out like a concession, like he was humoring a difficult client. You know this is the right thing. They need it more than you do. You've got this place. You've got more space than you know what to do with. More space than I know what to do with. As if grief could be solved by square footage. Trevor, I said slowly. I worked 30 years for that property. I built the business that paid for every stone, every beam, every screw in that house. Your mother and I— That's what fathers do, he interrupted. Provide. Make sure their family is taken care of. I provided for you, not for your in-laws. They're family now. No, I said, my voice sharpening. They're Madison's family. I barely know them. Silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear him breathing, could almost picture him in whatever expensive apartment Madison had talked him into, probably standing in their designer kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a showroom. Dad, you're being selfish. I laughed. A short, disbelieving sound that seemed to echo in the empty kitchen. Selfish? That's interesting coming from someone who just stole his father's house. I didn't steal anything. I made a practical decision for the good of the family. Whose family, Trevor? Because last I checked, I'm still your father and nobody asked me about this practical decision. His voice climbed toward anger. You hardly go there anymore. What's the point of it sitting empty? It's not healthy, the way you cling to that place. It's not empty. I'm there when I want to be there. You're clinging to a house, Dad. It's unhealthy. Mom wouldn't. Don't. The word came out harder than I'd intended. Do not speak for your mother. Another pause, longer this time. When Trevor spoke again, his voice had taken on the tone of someone who'd decided to be reasonable with an unreasonable person. You can't say no to me on this. Yes, I can. You think you can stop us? We're moving them in next weekend, whether you like it or not. I closed my eyes, seeing Caroline's face in my mind. The way she'd looked at Trevor when he was small and had done something that required correction. Not angry, just infinitely patient and completely immovable. No, I said again, calm and final. Don't do this, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll just embarrass yourself. For years, I'd avoided embarrassing myself in front of Trevor. I'd kept my voice level, kept my demands reasonable, kept my wallet open. But standing there in my empty kitchen, I realized that the embarrassment was already his, not mine. I'm done talking about this, I said. You're not in charge here anymore, he shot back. If you fight this, you'll lose. We'll take it anyway. There was a time I would have tried to reason with him, tried to find middle ground. But I'd spent my life in construction and negotiations, and I knew when the other side had no intention of finding common ground. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell him he was wrong. I didn't even ask him to reconsider. I just hung up. For the first time in our lives, I ended the call first. Sleep didn't come that night. I went through all the motions, shower, brushed teeth, even read a few pages of the biography Caroline had been encouraging me to tackle before she got sick. But when I lay down at 11, my mind refused to stay still. I kept thinking about timelines. 30 years in construction had trained me to think in phases: foundation, framing, systems, finish work. Every project had critical deadlines, and missing one could cascade through the entire schedule. Trevor had just given me a deadline. Next weekend. They were moving Harold and Vivian in whether I liked it or not. That told me everything I needed to know about how he saw this situation. Not as a family discussion, but as a fait accompli. All I had to do was get out of the way. But fixed deadlines could be hit from multiple angles, and I'd been underestimated before. By midnight, I'd stopped trying to sleep. I padded barefoot to the kitchen, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat at the table with a legal pad. At the top, I wrote one word in block letters: advantages, because that's what this came down to. In any negotiation, you had to identify your advantages and leverage them. Rule 1, never negotiate from desperation. Rule 2, control the information. Rule 3, own the timing. I started making lists, legal resources. I'd known Marcus Chen for 20 years. He'd handled my business contracts, kept my company out of 3 frivolous lawsuits, and once talked a city zoning board into reversing a decision that would have cost me $500,000. If anyone could build legal walls around the lake house, it was Marcus. Security options. The house had a basic alarm system, but nothing sophisticated. That could be upgraded. Locks could be changed. Access could be controlled. Psychological pressure. Now that was interesting. I'd used it in business negotiations before. Sometimes the most effective strategy wasn't to attack directly, but to create conditions that made the other party want to walk away on their own. By 2 a.m, I had the skeleton of a plan. Phase 1, legal reinforcement. Get the paperwork ironclad before Trevor even knew I was fighting back. Phase 2, create an uncomfortable environment for unauthorized occupants. Phase 3, let Trevor discover exactly what happens when you take something that doesn't belong to you. When the sun started pushing light through the blinds at 6:45, I showered, shaved, and put on the navy sport coat I wore for important client meetings. Not because Marcus would care. He'd seen me covered in sawdust and concrete dust more times than I could count. But because I needed to remind myself who I was, what I was capable of. A man who'd built a successful business from nothing. A man who'd raised a son and loved a wife and created something lasting. A man who wasn't going to be pushed around by his own child. Marcus Chen's downtown office occupied 3 floors of a glass tower that reflected the valley's sprawl and geometric patterns. I'd been there countless times over the years, but today it felt different. Today I wasn't there as a client seeking advice. I was there as a man preparing for war. Marcus stood when I walked in, his handshake as firm as I remembered. He was a small man with sharp features and sharper suits, the kind of lawyer who could dissect a contract with surgical precision and make you grateful for the education. Richard, good to see you, though I'm guessing this isn't a social call. I've got a family situation, I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Property dispute. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Commercial or residential? Residential. Clearwater Lake House. That's in your name? It is. Bought it outright 12 years ago. Marcus leaned back, pen poised over his legal pad. Who's making the claim? My son. He didn't flinch, but I saw something shift behind his eyes. Family disputes were always the messiest, always the most painful. What kind of claim? I gave him the basics. Trevor's announcement on the porch, his plan to move the Caldwells in permanently, his assumption that I'd simply accept it. Marcus took notes in his precise handwriting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Do you have the original deed? In my safe at home. Any co-signers on the purchase? Caroline and I were both on the deed initially, but it transferred entirely to me when she passed. Will? Current and up to date. Marcus nodded, still writing. We can reinforce your ownership with additional documentation, create a paper trail that makes any challenge extremely difficult. How quickly can we move? For basic reinforcement, a few days. For more comprehensive protection. He paused, calculating. 2 to 3 weeks. Too long. They're planning to move in next weekend. Marcus set down his pen and looked at me directly. Then we start immediately. I'll need every piece of paperwork you have on that property. Purchase documents, tax records, insurance policies, everything. Can you get them to me by tomorrow morning? Yes. Good. And Richard, document everything from here on out. Every conversation with your son, every text message, every interaction. If they make threats or demands, write them down with dates and times. If this escalates, we'll need a clear record. I left his office with the kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. The morning air was crisp for September, and the sky over Phoenix was the deep blue that only comes with the changing seasons. Halfway to my car, my phone buzzed. Trevor. I answered on the third ring. Dad, we need to settle this today. Harold and Vivian are expecting to move in Saturday. Don't make this difficult. I unlocked my car and slid behind the wheel. The leather was hot against my back despite the morning coolness. The only thing that's difficult is you thinking you can give away my property. It's not about property, Dad. It's about family. Harold lost his consulting contract last month. Vivian's been having panic attacks since they lost their condo. They need stability. That's unfortunate for them. It's not my problem to solve. It's called family responsibility, Trevor said, his voice taking on that lecturing tone I'd learned to hate. Something you used to understand. Like the responsibility you showed when you told me to leave my own porch? Silence. Then colder. They're still coming Saturday, with or without your blessing. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the parking lot for a moment, staring through the windshield at the city spreading out below. Saturday. 4 days to turn my lake house into a place they'd never want to set foot in again. 4 days to remind my son that he'd seriously underestimated his father. Tuesday morning brought the kind of light that seems to flatten everything it touches. I was at my desk before 7, papers spread in neat stacks, the lake house deed, tax records, insurance documents, maintenance receipts going back 12 years. Marcus would get them today, and he'd start building the legal fortress around my property. But paperwork was only one front in this war. Trevor had made one thing clear. He didn't respect boundaries he couldn't see. He thought this would be a simple matter of persistence versus stubbornness, that if he pushed long enough I'd fold the way I had for the past 3 years. That meant I had to change the terrain entirely. I sipped my coffee, staring at the photograph of Caroline on the corner of my desk. She'd been laughing when I took it, a strand of hair caught in the breeze off Clearwater Lake. The photo had always been a comfort. Lately, it had become something else, a reminder of what was worth fighting for. By 8, I was walking 3 houses down to the narrow ranch-style home with a white mailbox that read, Miles. Derek Miles was 48, divorced, and the kind of neighbor who could rewire a house in the time it took most people to read the instruction manual. We'd met the winter after Caroline died when a burst pipe in his basement had left him ankle-deep in freezing water. I'd called in a plumber I trusted, made sure the job was done right, and refused payment. Derek never forgot favors. He opened the door in jeans and a faded t-shirt from some tech startup that had probably gone bust years ago. His workshop glasses were smudged from hours of close work. "Richard," he said, stepping back to let me in. "Everything all right?" "Depends on how you define all right." His office looked like the inside of a server farm. 3 monitors, cables looped like electronic ivy, shelves stacked with routers, circuit boards, and devices I couldn't identify. He gestured toward a chair and I sat. "I need your help with a project," I said. His eyes narrowed slightly, the way they always did when he was trying to gauge whether someone was serious. "What kind of project?" "The kind that involves motion sensors, automated lighting, sound systems, maybe some visual effects, all triggered automatically when people enter a space." Derek leaned back, and I caught the hint of a smile. "Like a haunted house?" "Something like that. Except the goal isn't entertainment, it's to make unwanted guests uncomfortable enough to leave and not want to come back." Now he was fully grinning. "Who are we trying to discourage?" I shook my head. "Better you don't know all the details. Let's just say some people think they can move into a place they don't own. I want them to have a memorable experience." Derek looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can do memorable." We spent the next hour sketching out possibilities. Motion detectors in every main room, programmed to trigger lighting sequences that would be disorienting but not dangerous. Speakers hidden throughout the house, ready to play sounds. Footsteps in empty hallways, doors creaking, whispers just below the level of comprehension. Projectors to cast moving shadows on walls, and most importantly, a central control system I could operate remotely from my phone. "Can we integrate the plumbing?" I asked. "Showers, sinks, all turning on at once?" Derek's grin widened. "Absolutely. I'll need to tie into the water controls, but it's completely doable. And it's all legal. Just standard smart home automation creatively programmed." By 10, his van was loaded with equipment. Sensors no bigger than smoke detectors, rolls of programmable LED strips, compact projectors, and a tablet loaded with control software. Derek moved with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been waiting his entire life for an excuse to use all his toys at once. The drive to Clearwater Lake took just under 2 hours. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind kept playing through the layout of the house. Entry hall, living room, kitchen, the 3 upstairs bedrooms, Caroline's craft room that I hadn't touched since she died. Every room would have its role in the performance. When we pulled up to the house, Derek stepped out and whistled low. "Nice place." "It's mine," I replied evenly. "And I intend to keep it that way." Inside, the air still carried the faint scent of the wood polish I'd used on the floors last month. It felt strange to be there without Caroline, but today the strangeness was edged with purpose. We started in the entry hall. Derek mounted the first motion detector above the door, syncing it to his tablet. "When this triggers," he explained, "the living room lights will start strobing and the voice assistant will issue a warning." "What kind of warning?" He typed something into the tablet. A moment later, a calm but firm voice filled the room. "Attention. You are not authorized to be in this residence. Please leave immediately." I felt something that might have been satisfaction. Perfect. From there, we moved room by room. Upstairs, Derek positioned projectors to throw tall, shifting shadows against the walls, figures that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. In the kitchen, he rigged the faucets and garbage disposal to activate on command. Speakers went into corners, tucked behind furniture and inside closets. The sounds they would carry, random creaks, muffled footsteps, indistinct whispers, would layer over one another until you couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. "The whole system runs on a closed network," Derek said as he tucked cables behind baseboards. "It's independent of the main Wi-Fi, so unauthorized users can't shut it down or change passwords." "Backup power?" He grinned. Already covered. Battery systems in the basement will keep everything running for days, even if they shut off the main breaker. By mid-afternoon, the house had been transformed. To the casual eye, nothing looked different. That was the beauty of Derek's work. A living room still looked like a living room, but it was now a trigger point for light and sound. A hallway seemed normal until you stepped into it and the shadows began to move. We tested each sequence. The strobe lights pulsed in a rhythm designed to be disorienting. The voice assistant escalated its warnings if motion continued. The water systems roared to life after 30 seconds of sustained activity. The whispers, barely audible at first, grew more insistent the longer someone stayed. "This is going to work," Derek said, watching his tablet as sensors lit up in sequence across the house floor plan. "It has to," I replied. As we packed up, I stood in the entry hall looking out toward the lake. The sun was sinking behind the trees, throwing copper light across the water. Caroline had loved this hour, saying it made everything look like it was holding its breath. I locked the door, set the system to standby mode, and walked back to my car. In my mind, I could already see it. Trevor unlocking the door with his copied key, Madison and her parents trailing behind, all of them stepping into a house they thought was theirs. The house would teach them otherwise. Wednesday morning, Derek's knock came even earlier than expected. I opened the door to find him balancing additional equipment cases, a compact projector tucked under one arm. "Couldn't stop thinking about it," he said as he stepped inside. "Got some ideas to make this even better." Derek's ideas were never small. By the time we loaded his van, I'd counted 2 industrial-grade backup batteries, an array of new speakers no bigger than shot glasses, and something he called directional audio modules. "Think of it like a flashlight for sound," he explained as we drove toward the lake. "You point it at one spot and only the person standing there hears it. Nobody else in the room will notice a thing." I pictured Trevor standing in the hallway, hearing voices whisper directly into his ear while Madison and her parents looked around confused. Perfect. The house looked exactly as we'd left it 2 days before. That was the beauty of Derek's installation. Everything hidden in plain sight, waiting. We started with enhanced projectors. Derek mounted one high in the corner of the upstairs landing, its lens aimed to throw a shadow down the length of the hall. When he switched it on, a tall, elongated figure appeared, moving with the gentle sway of someone pacing. Even knowing it was just light and shadow, I felt my instincts tighten. "Imagine seeing that at 2 in the morning," Derek said. We added more projectors in the guest rooms, programmed to flicker every few minutes, just enough to catch the edge of someone's peripheral vision. Then came the directional audio installation. Derek mounted one unit in the entry hall, hidden behind crown molding. When we tested it, I stood on the welcome mat and heard a low voice whisper, "You don't belong here." Step 6 inches to the left, and it vanished. Step back, and it returned. "That one's going to get inside their heads," Derek said with professional satisfaction. By noon, we had a fully integrated system. Lights strobed on motion. Water roared from every fixture after 30 seconds of activity. But now there were layers, shadows to see, voices to hear, and the constant unease of never knowing what would trigger next. The final touch was the backup power installation. Derek slid battery units behind wall panels in the basement, tucked where they'd never be found without demolishing the house. "These will keep the whole system running for at least a week," he said. "Good luck finding them without tearing the place apart." By late afternoon, we were ready for final testing. We started in the entry hall. Motion sensor triggered, lights flared in disorienting rhythm. Voice assistant announced its warning. Derek moved deeper into the house. Water erupted in the kitchen. Shadows flickered against the walls. Whispers followed him like a second shadow. Upstairs, the landing projector sent its pacing figure across the wall while bedroom speakers played slow, irregular knocking. Not loud, just there. The kind of sound you'd swear was real until you opened the door and found nothing. The timing was flawless. Each element built on the last and everything reset after a few minutes of stillness, ready to trigger again. This, Derek said, grinning as we stood in the now quiet house, is a masterpiece. It's a tool, I corrected, though part of me agreed with his assessment. We sat on the porch steps as the sun set over Clearwater Lake, eating sandwiches from the cooler I'd brought. The water was calm, reflecting the last light like hammered metal. The house behind us looked peaceful, welcoming, the same refuge it had always been for Caroline and me. No one looking at it would guess it was now wired to defend itself. "You know, Richard," Derek said, wiping his hands on a napkin, "there's something deeply satisfying about giving a house teeth." I thought of Caroline, of the years she'd insisted this place be somewhere people felt welcome. She wouldn't have liked the idea of teeth, but she would have understood the principle. Sometimes you have to protect what matters. By evening, we had everything stowed, the system armed, and the control tablet synced to my phone. I could now monitor the house from anywhere, watch live camera feeds, activate sequences, adjust timing on the fly. Standing in the doorway before we left, I took one last look around. The furniture sat exactly where it always had. The rugs straight, the curtains drawn just so. Nothing suggested that every corner, every threshold, every quiet space was now a carefully calibrated trap. Back in Phoenix that night, I sat in my study with the tablet glowing beside me. The lake house camera feeds showed empty rooms all waiting. At 8:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "We'll be there around 2 Saturday. Don't bother coming up to cause trouble." I stared at the screen, the corners of my mouth lifting slightly. Exact timing. He'd just given me the final piece I needed. 2 o'clock Saturday. They'd arrive confident, entitled, certain I was nowhere nearby. And my house, Caroline's house, would be ready to greet them. I closed the message without replying and leaned back in my chair. In construction, the most dangerous moment is right before the first hammer falls. All the force is still potential. All the change still invisible. Saturday, the hammer would fall. Saturday, September 23rd, 1:45 p.m. The camera feed from the entry hall was quiet, the lake beyond shimmering like brushed steel. I sat in my study 200 miles away, the control tablet angled toward me, my coffee growing cold. Every system in the house was armed, sensors primed, audio cued, projectors loaded, water controls ready. The house sat like a loaded spring, waiting for the right pressure to release. At exactly 2:02 p.m., a dark SUV appeared on the driveway camera. Trevor drove, his posture confident even from this distance. Madison sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses pushed up into her blonde hair. Harold and Vivian filled the back seat, leaning forward like tourists eager for their first glimpse of paradise. They moved with the casual efficiency of people who believed they belonged. Trevor popped the rear hatch and began unloading suitcases while Madison directed traffic from the side. Harold lifted a rolling bag that looked expensive. Vivian cradled a large canvas tote, the kind people bring when they plan to stay indefinitely. Through the audio feed, I could hear gravel crunching under their feet, the distant cry of a hawk somewhere over the water. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. That was about to change. As they approached the porch steps, Harold noticed the sign Derek had mounted beside the door, brushed steel on cedar backing, the message etched in bold letters. Smart home active, authorized personnel only. Vivian stopped first, her grip tightening on her tote bag. What's this supposed to mean? Harold squinted at the text. Some kind of security notice. Madison laughed dismissively. Oh, that's just Richard being dramatic. He's always installing some new gadget. Ignore it. Trevor didn't even glance at the sign. Come on, let's get inside. But Vivian wasn't satisfied. She reached up, gripped the mounting bracket and yanked. The screws pulled free from the siding with a sharp squeal. The sign clattered onto the wooden planks. There, she said, brushing off her hands. Much better. I watched the steel plate settle at the edge of the porch, sunlight glinting off its surface. They climbed the steps in single file, Trevor leading, Madison close behind, Harold following with his expensive luggage. Vivian trailing with that small, satisfied smile of someone who'd already begun improving her surroundings. Trevor pulled out a key, my key, copied from the spare I'd given him years ago, and slid it into the lock. The door opened without resistance. "Welcome home," he said over his shoulder and led them inside. I switched the tablet view to the living room feed and watched them enter the space Caroline and I had created together. Their shoes crossed the Navajo rug we'd bought on our anniversary trip to Santa Fe. Their voices carried clearly through the microphone system. "Oh, it's even lovelier than I imagined," Vivian breathed, setting down her bag near the fireplace. Harold rolled his suitcase to the foot of the stairs. "Feels like a real home." Madison drifted toward the kitchen. "Let's figure out dinner. I'm starving after that drive." Trevor stood in the center of the living room, hands on his hips, surveying the space like a general inspecting conquered territory. There was an ease in his posture I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, back when he still believed his parents would fix whatever he broke. I let them move freely for the next hour and a half. Harold explored upstairs, opening closets and examining the views from each bedroom window. Vivian rearranged couch cushions and repositioned Caroline's ceramic collection on the mantel. Madison found wine in the kitchen and poured generous glasses for everyone. Trevor adjusted the thermostat and tested the cable television. Every few minutes, one of them would pass a motion sensor. The tablet would light up, noting the activation, but I didn't trigger anything. Not yet. Let them get comfortable. Let them start thinking of it as theirs. By 8:30 that evening, the sun had set over Clearwater Lake, and the house had settled into what should have been peaceful evening rhythms. The upstairs camera showed Harold in pajamas heading toward the guest room. Vivian was already in bed with a paperback novel. Madison was rinsing dinner dishes in the kitchen. Trevor sprawled on the couch with his phone, scrolling through social media with the faint smirk of a man who thought the day had gone exactly according to plan. I waited until the house's audio signature, a graph showing ambient noise levels, had dropped to near silence. 10:03 p.m. From my chair in Phoenix, I leaned forward and tapped the icon on the tablet's main screen. Execute full sequence. The house came alive in less than a second. Lights in every room began strobing. Not the gentle pulse of mood lighting, but sharp, disorienting flashes in alternating red, blue, and white. Upstairs, projectors threw shifting shadows across hallway walls. Downstairs, speakers whispered just above the threshold of hearing, "You don't belong here. You don't belong here." In the kitchen, water erupted from every faucet with mechanical violence. The garbage disposal roared to life. Steam began clouding the bathroom mirrors as showers turned themselves on at maximum heat. The upstairs camera caught Harold stumbling into the hallway, one hand shielding his eyes from the strobing lights. Vivian, what the hell is happening?" Vivian's voice floated from the guest room, high and sharp with panic. "Harold, there's someone in the walls." Madison appeared in the living room feed, her head whipping from side to side as shadows slid along the ceiling. "Trevor, did you set up some kind of system?" Trevor bolted upright from the couch. "No, it's probably some kind of power surge or—" He cut himself off as the voice assistant overrode every other sound in the house. "Attention. Unauthorized occupants detected. Leave the premises immediately." The directional audio in the entry hall kicked in. Trevor froze mid-step as a whisper hit his right ear alone. "Get out." He spun around, looking for the source, but Madison and her parents were already converging in the kitchen, trying frantically to shut off the water. The kitchen camera showed Madison twisting faucet handles that refused to respond. Harold yanked at cabinet doors as if the solution might be hidden behind the dish soap. Vivian clutched the doorframe, watching shadows slide across the ceiling like living things. Upstairs, the guest room projector flickered to life, casting the silhouette of a tall figure in the doorway. Vivian's scream cut through all the other noise. "Trevor, call the police!" He was already fumbling for his phone, but even if he managed to get through, I knew exactly what the authorities would find. A perfectly functioning smart home system. Nothing illegal, nothing broken, just an unfortunate technical malfunction. The upstairs camera showed Harold grabbing Vivian's arm. "We're leaving. Right now." Madison's voice overlapped his. "I can't get the front door to open." 30-second delay on the smart lock, just long enough to make them feel the walls closing in. I watched Trevor pull at the handle, his shoulders bunching with effort. When the lock finally disengaged, they spilled out onto the porch like water through a burst dam. They were in the SUV and reversing down the driveway in under 90 seconds, taillights disappearing into the pine-scented darkness. The camera feeds followed their retreat until the forest swallowed them completely. The house went quiet again, systems resetting to standby mode. I sat back in my chair, hands resting lightly on the armrests. The sequence had run perfectly. Not a single glitch, not one moment where they could have regained control of the narrative. Trevor had thought he was arriving at his new vacation home. Instead, he'd walked straight into mine. The phone rang at 7:31 Sunday morning while the lake house camera feeds were still open on my tablet. Trevor's name lit up the display. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Good morning, son. What did you do?" The words came out sharp, brittle, the sound of someone who hadn't slept and was running on adrenaline and fury. "What do you mean? Don't play innocent with me." His voice cracked too high, losing the controlled tone he'd been practicing. "The house went insane last night. Lights flashing everywhere, water pouring out of every faucet, voices screaming at us to leave. Vivian was crying for hours. Harold thought he was having a heart attack." I shifted in my chair, glancing at the peaceful morning scene on my monitors, empty rooms, sunlight streaming across hardwood floors. "That sounds terrifying. Did you call someone?" "We called the police," he said, bitterness dripping from every word. "They came out at 6 this morning, searched the whole house, said they didn't find anything wrong with the electrical or plumbing. Everything looked normal to them." "Well," I said, allowing just enough sympathy to soften my tone, "that's a relief." "Relief?" His volume spiked. "We didn't sleep for 8 hours. Harold collapsed twice getting to the car." "It's Vivian's husband," I corrected gently. "Harold. I don't care what his name is right now." Trevor's composure was completely gone. "This wasn't some random malfunction and we both know it. You did something to that house." I smiled at the monitor, though he couldn't see me. "Trevor, I was in Phoenix all night, 200 miles away. How could I possibly control a house from here?" "You could have hired someone, set up some kind of elaborate system to scare us." "To do what exactly? Install a haunted house to frighten my son? That sounds a bit far-fetched, don't you think?" His breathing was ragged through the phone. "This isn't over, you hear me? We're not letting some technical glitch stop us. They're still moving in." I glanced at the camera feeds again, the house sitting empty and serene, waiting. Maybe the house just doesn't like strangers. The silence that followed stretched for 10 long seconds. "I underestimated you," Trevor said finally, his voice lower now, edged with something that wasn't quite fear but was definitely in the neighborhood. "That's been known to happen." The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and sat back in my chair. If last night had been opening night, then this morning was the review. They'd been rattled, their certainty cracked. But the show wasn't over yet. Like any good production, the second act had to raise the stakes. By 10 o'clock, the driveway camera lit up again. A white van pulled up to the house, Peterson Locksmith painted on the side in blue letters. A man in coveralls stepped out carrying a heavy toolbox. Trevor was with him, gesturing toward the front door with obvious frustration. The locksmith knelt to examine the lock, then looked back at Trevor, shaking his head. The audio feed caught their exchange. "These aren't regular locks, sir," the locksmith said. "They're integrated smart systems, biometric scanners, wireless connectivity, backup power supplies. Very sophisticated." "Can't you just replace them?" Trevor asked. "Not without reprogramming the entire network. And that's—" The man closed his toolbox with a decisive click. "That's not my area. You'd need a specialist in home automation systems." I allowed myself a small, private smile. Derek Miles was the only such specialist within 200 miles who had intimate knowledge of this particular system, and Derek only took orders from me. The locksmith left. Trevor stood on the porch for a long moment, hands on his hips, before trudging back to his car in defeat. The house stayed locked. The cameras stayed active. The system stayed armed. Monday passed without contact. Tuesday evening brought them to my front door in Phoenix, Trevor and Madison this time, without her shell-shocked parents. They stood on my welcome mat like people who'd exhausted all their polite options. Madison positioned herself a step behind Trevor, arms folded, jaw set in a hard line. Her usual perfect composure had developed cracks around the edges. "We need to talk," Trevor said when I opened the door. "By all means." I stepped back, letting them into my entry hall. Madison's perfume hit me before her words. Sharp, citrusy, expensive enough to announce itself. "This game ends now," Trevor said without preamble. "Either you stop whatever you're doing to that house and give us access, or—" He glanced at Madison for support. "Or what?" I asked mildly. Madison's voice was low, controlled, dangerous. "Or you'll never see us again. No visits, no holidays, no future grandchildren." There was a time when that threat would have been a knife between my ribs. Now it was just information. "So that's an ultimatum." "It's reality," Trevor replied. "You're old, Dad. You're alone. What do you need with a place like that, anyway?" I looked from one to the other, my son and the woman who'd convinced him that family loyalty was a business transaction. Interesting perspective, coming from people who tried to steal it without asking. Madison's eyes flashed. "We thought you'd be reasonable about a reasonable request." "I am being reasonable," I said evenly. "I'm keeping what's mine." Trevor stepped closer, trying to use his height as intimidation. "You think you're clever? We'll sue you. Harassment, emotional distress, intentional infliction of suffering. We'll tell everyone what you did." "Based on what evidence?" I asked. "That your inherited smart home system malfunctioned? That the house I own and maintain had technical difficulties when unauthorized people tried to occupy it?" His jaw worked silently for several seconds. "This isn't over." I leaned against the door frame, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "I think it is." They left without another word. I didn't watch them drive away. Some exits don't deserve an audience. In my study, I pulled out a legal pad and made one final list. The conversation had given me the last piece I needed. Tomorrow I'd call Marcus Chen and then a few other people. Trevor thought this battle was about technology and intimidation tactics. He was wrong. The end game would be about paper, legal, binding, and permanent. The house could scare them away, but I wanted them locked out for good. Some doors, once closed, should never open again. The morning after Trevor and Madison's failed intimidation visit, Phoenix was wrapped in the kind of gray sky that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I poured black coffee, no cream, no sugar, the way Caroline always said real coffee should be drunk, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone in one hand and a lifetime of careful planning in the other. Marcus Chen answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the crisp efficiency of a man who'd already been at his desk for 2 hours. "Richard, what's the situation?" "I need to put Clearwater Lake beyond Trevor's reach," I said. "Permanently. No loopholes, no future claims, no possibility of him ever getting his hands on it." The sound of pen scratching paper came through the phone. "And you don't want to sell it outright?" "No, but I don't want it in my name anymore either. Not if it means they'll keep circling like vultures." "That leaves us with a couple of options," Marcus said. "Cleanest would be an irrevocable trust or direct donation to an entity you control. Another possibility is gifting it to a qualified charity." I leaned back in my chair, thinking of Caroline's voice, warm and certain, talking about the local Veterans Transition Center she'd volunteered with for years. Clearwater Lake wasn't just a property. It was a place she'd believed could heal people who'd seen too much, lost too much. Maybe it still could. "Veterans Haven Foundation," I said. They've been trying to buy waterfront property for veteran family retreats for years. Marcus didn't miss a beat. Excellent choice. I can have donation paperwork drawn up within 48 hours. Once it's signed and recorded, the property becomes legally untouchable by family claims. And I can still use it? I'll add a clause granting you honorary lifetime access rights. Legally, you won't own it, which means Trevor can't claim any inheritance interest. But practically, you'll be able to visit whenever the facility isn't in active use. Perfect. We arranged to meet that afternoon. By 2 o'clock, I was sitting in Marcus's wood-paneled office, the kind of place where even the air seemed to carry legal weight. The windows overlooked downtown Phoenix, but the blinds were half closed against the harsh afternoon light. Marcus slid a neat stack of documents across his mahogany desk. Here's the deed transfer. Here's the charitable gift agreement with Veterans Haven. And here, he tapped the final page, is your lifetime access clause, revocable only by you. I read every line, every clause, every semicolon. The language was precise, unambiguous, bulletproof. When I signed my name on the final page, I felt something shift inside me, like the weight of the lake house had moved off my shoulders onto a different foundation entirely, one Trevor could never touch. Marcus gathered the papers with the same methodical care he'd used to arrange them. I'll have this recorded with the county clerk first thing tomorrow morning. By Friday, it'll be a matter of public record. Anyone who searches the property deed will see Veterans Haven Foundation listed as owner. And Trevor? Marcus gave a small, dry smile. He can hire every lawyer in the state. Won't matter. The property will be legally beyond his reach. That evening, I sat in my study with the lake house camera feeds open on my laptop. The place looked peaceful in the golden hour light, exactly as Caroline and I had always loved it. At 7:12 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. Trevor's truck. Madison in the passenger seat. They got out fast, marching up to the front door like conquerors returning to claim their prize. Trevor tried his copied key. The smart lock stayed engaged. He pounded on the door, shouted once, not Dad, not Richard, just a harsh, open up. When no answer came, he stepped back and glared at the house like it had personally insulted him. Madison pulled out her phone and started recording a video. "This is harassment," she announced to her camera. "This is unlawful denial of access. We'll see him in court." I almost laughed. She didn't know that by the time any court heard their case, the deed would already show a different owner entirely. The next morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Trevor's number appeared on my caller ID at 8:23 a.m. "This is it," he said without greeting. "We're taking legal action. Unlawful eviction, harassment, emotional distress." "Trevor," I interrupted gently, "before you file anything, you might want to check who actually owns the lake house." "What are you talking about?" "It's not mine anymore," I said, "and it's certainly not yours." Silence. Then, "What the hell did you do?" "I honored your mother's memory," I said. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." His voice rose to nearly a shout. "You gave it away? To who?" "You'll find out soon enough. It'll be public record by this afternoon." "You're going to regret this," he said, but there was something hollow in the threat now. "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to sleep better than I have in years." The line went dead. 2 days later, the news broke faster than I'd anticipated. Veterans Haven Foundation posted a photo on their social media. Their director standing on the lake house porch, the water sparkling behind her. The caption read, "We are beyond grateful to accept the generous donation of Clearwater Lake Retreat from Mr. Richard Williams. This facility will serve as a healing sanctuary for veterans and their families for generations to come." The local paper picked it up. So did a regional news blog and 2 veteran advocacy websites. By noon, my phone was buzzing with calls and messages, not from Trevor, but from people I hadn't heard from in months, all offering congratulations or curious questions about my decision. When Trevor finally did call, his voice was flat, almost stunned. "So that's it. You'd rather give it to strangers than to your own son?" I'd rather give it to people who understand what honor means, I said. You've destroyed this family. No, I said quietly. You did that when you told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. There was nothing left for him to say after that. I ended the call, leaned back in my chair, and looked out at the Phoenix skyline shimmering in the desert heat. The lake house was no longer mine, but it was safe. Caroline's place, our place, was now somewhere good people would go to heal from wounds that ran deeper than flesh. And Trevor? He'd been locked out not by technology or legal maneuvering, but by his own choices. The war wasn't escalating anymore. It was over. And for the first time in 3 years, I'd won something that mattered. 6 months later, I received an invitation in the mail. Heavy cardstock, elegant lettering. Veterans Haven Foundation cordially invites you to the dedication ceremony for the Caroline Williams Memorial Retreat at Clearwater Lake. Caroline's name in bronze letters. The date. What would have been our 28th wedding anniversary. I drove up on a crisp March morning, the road through the pines still familiar despite everything that had changed. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw cars I didn't recognize. License plates from 3 different states, families walking the grounds with the careful movements of people, learning to trust peaceful spaces again. A young woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake introduced herself as Sarah Martinez, the retreat coordinator. Mr. Williams, we can't thank you enough. This place, it's already changing lives. She led me down to the dock where Caroline and I had spent countless evenings watching the sun paint the water gold. A small bronze plaque had been mounted on the railing, in memory of Caroline Williams, who believed every soul deserves a place to heal. She would have loved this, I said, running my fingers over the smooth metal. You're welcome here any time, Sarah said. We have a guest cabin set aside specifically for you. It's yours whenever you need it. As the ceremony began, I stood in the back, watching families who'd found their way to this sanctuary Caroline and I had built. Children played on the lawn while their parents, many wearing the invisible scars of service, talked quietly on the porch. An older veteran sat alone at the end of the dock, staring at the water with the expression of someone learning to remember peace instead of war. During the drive home, my phone rang, Trevor's name on the display. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity, or maybe hope, made me pick up. Dad? His voice was different, quieter, less certain. I saw the article about the dedication ceremony about Mom's memorial. It was beautiful, I said. I wanted to be there. A long pause. I know I don't have the right to ask, but could I visit sometime? Not to cause trouble. Just to see what you and Mom built there. I thought about Caroline, about forgiveness, about the difference between earned grace and cheap reconciliation. Call Sarah Martinez at Veterans Haven. Tell her you're my son. She'll find a time when it's appropriate. Thank you. Trevor, I said before he could hang up. Your mother would want you to understand something. That place was never about the building or the land. It was about creating space for healing. Don't forget that. I won't, he said. And for the first time in years, he sounded like he meant it. I drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, watching the desert landscape roll past my windows. In my rearview mirror, the mountains where Clearwater Lake nestled among the pines grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared into the horizon. But they didn't disappear completely. Some places, once they've touched your heart, stay with you forever. The difference is learning to carry them the right way, not as possessions to be hoarded, but as gifts to be shared. Caroline had taught me that. It just took me longer than I'd hoped to remember the lesson. The house in Phoenix felt different when I walked through the front door that evening. Not empty anymore. Not waiting for something that would never come. Just quiet in the way homes are supposed to be quiet. Peaceful, not lonely. I made dinner for one and sat at the kitchen table with Caroline's picture propped against the salt shaker. Outside, the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, and somewhere 200 miles north, families were gathering around a dinner table in a house that had learned the difference between being owned and being home. Some victories, I realized, are too important to keep to yourself, and some legacies are too precious to let anyone steal. 1 year later, I received a handwritten letter on Veterans Haven Foundation letterhead. The return address showed Sarah Martinez's name, but the handwriting was different, shakier, older. Dear Mr. Williams, my name is Robert Chen. I'm a Vietnam veteran, 72 years old, and I spent 3 days at your wife's memorial retreat last month with my son Marcus, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. We hadn't spoken properly in 5 years before we came to Clearwater Lake. I wanted you to know that on our last morning there, Marcus and I sat on the dock your wife loved and talked about things we'd never been able to say to each other, about war, about coming home, about the distance that gets between fathers and sons when they've both seen too much. We're planning to come back next year, together. And I wanted to thank you for understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with something you love is let it go. The house remembers your wife, Mr. Williams. I can feel her there in the way the light hits the water, in the way the rooms seem to breathe with peace instead of holding their breath with worry. You gave the right gift to the right people. We won't forget. With gratitude. Robert Chen. I read the letter twice, then walked out to Caroline's rose garden, where new blooms were fighting their way through the desert soil she'd spent years training to support impossible beauty. Some fights, I thought, watching the evening light catch the red petals, are worth every minute they take, and some homes are worth every sacrifice they demand. Somewhere in the distance, a dove called to its mate, and the sound carried across the valley like an old song remembered at exactly the right moment. The phone in my pocket buzzed once, a text from Trevor. Dad, Marcus and I would like to visit the lake house next month if that's okay. I want to show him where Grandma Caroline used to read to me when I was small. I think I'm ready to remember that now. I typed back, call Sarah, tell her you're my family, she'll make room. Because that's what families do when they remember how to be families again. They make room for healing. They make space for second chances. They remember that love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. The roses nodded in the evening breeze, and somewhere deep in my chest, I felt Caroline's smile,